Brian Campbell, who is the number one pound-for-pound fighter today in mixed martial arts?
Alexander Volkanovski.
Right,
and I think it's, you can make a debate either way. I've debated it all morning. But at the end of the day, so we saw something somewhat similar in boxing recently when Canelo was everyone's pound for pound. He dared to degrade another division higher against unbeaten champion Dimitri Bivol. He came out on the losing end of 3 scorecards that were 7 rounds to 5. You and I had it wider for Bivol, but I'm just stating the facts. And I think I was one of the only, if not the only, at least American journalist who does a pound for pound top 10 that said, hey, folks, I'm not going to count that against Canelo because he's competitive in a division over his head against one of the 10 best fighters in the sport. And if they ran it back, Canelo could potentially make adjustments and win. In this case, Luke, I think it's even more respectable what Volkanovski did compared to Canelo because he fought another guy who has the same argument and claim right now. Who is number one pound for pound? Look, folks, it's either Volkanovski or it's Makhachev. I will say this. I wanted romantically for this fight to be as a storyline lead-in what it ultimately became. 1 versus 2 pound for pound. And we were all like, when was the last time that happened? What's the history? Oh my God. It only really became that because the UFC, I felt, jumped the gun through Makhachev at number 2 pound for pound to make it that way. I even felt that I jumped the gun after Makhachev beat Oliveira and was previously unranked in my top 10. And I think I put him up there at number 4 because I'm like, damn, dude, he just dominated one of the best in the world. But what Volkanovski showed in a losing effort, particularly in the areas of takedown defense and how he defended potential chokes on the ground, mixed with the fact that he almost scored 2 takedowns of his own and dropped the bigger fighter and had the better cardio and scored the biggest moments of the fight. Although, reminder, folks, we don't score it that way. Okay, that's just what the rules are. Alexander Volkanovski is still the pound for pound king because of, I saw you tweeting about criteria, and I'm sure you're going to get to that in a second. And yes, in a boxing sense, where I come from, the criteria that elite journalists use to make these pound for pound lists is always wildly all over the place, in my opinion. Right. I think there's a lot of people that focus too much on accomplishments when I believe that the accomplishments get you into the conversation, but inevitably it's going to come down to the eye test. 2 sides to the eye test. 1, a person hasn't had enough elite foes for us to truly know how elite he is, so we have to do the foreshadowing math in our head. The other half of the eye test is what I consider to be the true sort of decider when you have debates in this. What does a mythical fight look like between them? If they can fight, which you can't do physically, fight at the same weight class using the same strengths and weaknesses that they hold in their natural division against each other. Those are fights that can actually only happen in the mind, meaning, man, what does Ngannou look like against, say it, anybody, right? Against Volkanovski. And you're like, okay, if he had that same advantages here, I get that this is all weird mental math, and that's why a lot of people go, screw pound for pound, it's worthless. I don't agree. I think it actually is the only true currency when we're debating greatness. In this case, yes, these two were able to fight each other, but look at the debate we have coming out of there, whether Volkanovski could have or should have won. I disagree, but what I don't disagree on was that he elevated his game to such a higher level than Islam Makhachev had to. Yet even Makhachev did elevate his game with the striking. But if they were fighting at 145... I don't know if I
understand that. If you're fighting the number 1 pound for pound guy, right, heading into the fight, because Volkanovski was heading into the fight, he was number 1, why do you not have to raise the level of your fucking game to fight that guy? And by the way, outstrike him. We're talking about the best fighter in the sport heading into the contest.
Right. Look, Makhachev raised his game in a lot of ways. I just feel like Volkanovski had to raise it more because of the natural disadvantage he had in coming up in weight. And the fact that he did not spend 25 minutes of this fight on his back, fighting and using all of his gas tank to try to get out of positions. In fact, he was reversing these positions. He was nearly taking Makhachev down. If they were fighting at featherweight and they were the same size, what I saw on Saturday night is that Volkanovski's actually potentially the better fighter here. It's just in this circumstance and this fight, came up just short. To me, that's enough to hold the pound for pound number 1 crown for right now. They're both going to have fights coming up, I'm sure, in the next 4, 5, 6 months. Things can change at any time. John Jones is parachuting back in here. If he wins the heavyweight title, we got a different discussion as well. But as we stand right now, Luke, Volkanovski's the best fighter in the world. And he proved that on Saturday, even though he didn't win the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit mixed on this one. I don't. To be clear, this is why I'm mixed. I don't do pound for pound rankings. I don't do any rankings. I don't spend weeks doing it. I don't spend months doing it where you're tracking over time and who's rising, who's falling. I don't pay attention to it at all. I don't do it. I mean, I try to have a loose idea of who the better ones are, and I've thought that Volkanovski heading into the contest deserved the pound for pound ranking, and I can understand the arguments for keeping it. Again, I think that it's a weird situation, right? Because he's the smaller guy. He went up in many ways, kind of outperformed the other guy. Didn't get the nod though. So what are you supposed to do with that? It creates this inherent conflict. I mean, I have two basic problems, I think, with the pound for pound discussion. I agree that it's actually worth having, because at the end of the day, what are you trying to figure out? You're trying to figure out who is the best fighter in the sport. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Who is the best fighter? Who is the very best fighter that we have? But in order to figure that out, you have to give me what the definition is of best. Right? What does best mean? What goes into defining best? People just toss these words into conversation and think that they carry obvious meaning, when in fact it does the opposite. Right? So if I tell you that so-and-so is the best fighter, upon what am I making that conversation or that argument? There must be something that backs it. Is it the number of wins? Is it the number of stoppages? The number of ranked opponents? The length of a win streak? The length of a title reign? The number of titles? The number of weight classes? Right? These things kind of all have to be ironed out, and then you have to have a really good definition of best. You have to have those things figured out. No one ever figures this out ahead of time, and so people are having these like conversations where it's just two ships passing in the night, because one person has an idea of what best means and one has another. And by the way, one has not necessarily proven that their definition is actually coherent or better than the other one. So there's a lot of like everyone talking past each other or very loosely, and then assuming that there's this implied wisdom when you say pound for pound or best. That's my first problem. The second problem that I have is that, dude, I'm sorry. Like, this is how I personally feel. If you're the number one guy and you go and fight the number two guy, even if it's up a weight class, to like ultimately put your stamp on the sport, and you come up short, there should be a penalty for that. There should be a penalty for that. I don't think you should get to keep your standing as it was. Your standing as it was is no longer as good as it once was. I understand the argument that he won the story. I agree he won the story. He certainly won the fanfare. Hello, I've been on the Volkanovski train before I even started at fucking Showtime. I mean, this is not a guy that I am like new or unaccustomed to his success or greatness. But I just kind of feel it's a little weird to go and be like, I'm the best guy in the sport, lose, and then say, oh, I'm still the best guy in the sport. There should be some kind of accounting for that I don't think people want to give, because they feel emotionally lifted by his performance.
Look, it's the ultimate hipster debate within something that is a hipster debate to begin with. So that's not lost on me. I get what you're saying. I just think, one guy came up in weight to do this. Doesn't mean he gets every single benefit of the doubt. We've seen that happen a lot of times, but he did do it. And even though I scored the fight 4-1, the rest of the world seems to think they were largely on even terms for most of that. What if they were really on even terms? Would that have been enough for Volkanovski to get the edge? That's what I'm leaning to in the end, because the performances of both were ultimately so close, and because, I can't stress this enough, Volkanovski was the fresher fighter late, landing damage up until the final bell. Mm-hmm. So I get that there has to be a penalty, Luke, but at the same time, this is a mythical debate that's aimed at trying to produce, at the end of the day, that with all the information that we have, including the information that we don't have, which is a key part about pound for pound debate, because for the most part, these guys will never fight each other. So you've got to work off information you don't have. When I compute that all together, I say right now, Volkanovski's still the best fighter in the world, and he showed that on Saturday. But everything can change in one fight. You're only as good as your last fight. That's the truth in pound for pound debate for the most part. And if I'm going to do that for Canelo, Luke, because I felt that at that moment he lost to Bivol in a close-ish fight, he was still the best fighter in the world at 168, the best fighter in the world at 160, and all around, skill for skill, also the best. I kind of feel that for Volkanovski, in the sense that, like, the key question I'm asking myself on the way out here is, could Volkanovski win a rematch against Makhachev? I say yes, he could. And number two, could any other lightweight in the world, like, put off that performance that Makhachev did and edge him? I don't know, Luke. Like, if you had Volkanovski moving forward, let's say he announced Saturday, I did so good here, I'm done with featherweight and I'm going to lightweight for good. Who are you going to favor against him? That's the key question that I think ultimately decides for me why I'm still okay holding him at number one. Who's going to, outside of Makhachev, who just did beat him, but it was close, who's going to beat Volkanovski at lightweight, Luke?
That's a tough question. Do you wonder maybe Dariush would give him a tough fight?
And that's why I'm okay keeping him at number one. And I know, dude, I know it's splitting hairs, but that's what it's about. Somebody's got to do the heavy lifting and take a stand and make a statement. Volkanovski, best in show right now.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I thought he was the best fighter in the world before that fight. I still think he's the best fighter in the world. And folks are like, well, then you think he's pound for pound one. But pound for pound, when you actually begin to define the criteria, it begins to be a range of accomplishments. And it's not abundantly clear to me that his range of accomplishments...
If you do it wrong, it is. If you do it wrong, it's too much of a range of accomplishments, Luke.
If you do it wrong, that's right, because you can go too far. But certainly in defining what the word best means, right? I saw guys being like, it's simple, he's the most dominant. Right. Define for me what dominance means. Number of rounds you've lost, number of fights you've won, number of weight classes you've won in. Like, you can't just say these words like best or dominance. They are empty nonsense unless you fill them with definitions. So fill them with a definition, and then we can have that out. But I just want to be clear. I think Volkanovski is the most talented guy in the sport. I really, truly believe that. But I also believe that if you're going to test yourself in the way that he does, and you come up short, right? You lost unanimously. Whatever you want to think about the judges, Ben Cartlidge was one of them. He's one of the best judges that we have. He scored it for Makhachev. The idea that, like, I just get to keep all the same accolades I had before as if they're now unblemished, I just don't believe that personally. But I recognize that you're dealing with, this is just a rare moment in the sport where, like, so I think it was Kaposa who tweeted it, BC. I'll share it with you here, which was, he's like, how cool would it be to have two different champions have an ongoing rivalry where, they go back to their weight classes, they defend a couple times, and then they get right back after it again a little bit later. It's kind of like Penn St. Pierre, but the first time Penn fought St. Pierre, he was not the champion, and St. Pierre got away just barely, but then in the rematch, he obviously fucked him up real good.